Have you ever felt bored and unsatisfied with your life? Has your 9 to 5 started to feel like infinity to infinity with no light at the end of the tunnel? Fight Club just might be the film for you. Fight Club is one of those movies that ended up taking a life of its own. People are still making all types of content about the film to this day, and it seems like most of the internet is at the very least familiar with what occurs in the plot. Today, I want to talk about what exactly led to this movie having so much staying power. Before I start, I want to say that if you haven't seen this movie yet, you owe it to yourself to go see it for yourself before you watch this video. Trust me, you'll be glad you did. We start the movie with the narrator, who we'll call Jack because that's what he's called in the script for the movie, and I want to keep things easy. Jack works for a major car company and suffers from insomnia. Jack's doctor sends him to a testicle cancer support group to show him others who are suffering worse than him. These men being able to open up and cry to each other touches Jack deeply, making his insomnia completely disappear. That is, until Marla shows up. Marla is at every support group Jack goes to, and Marla's existence forces a mirror into Jack's face, causing his insomnia to flare back up. Jack chooses to confront Marla, who calls him on his hypocrisy at first, but the two are eventually able to come to an agreement on who will go to what group. This scene gives us a great intro to how Marla views life, going to these support groups because it's cheaper than a movie and the coffee is free. She steals clothes from a laundromat and sells them to a secondhand store, probably planning to use the money for cigarettes. I like how she's set up as a typical reluctant love interest, yet is always made to look pale and almost ghoulish, fitting her right in with the aesthetic of the world Jack builds. There are some theories around Marla not being real. The only thing that I saw that might even slightly support that is Marla's number surviving the fire the way it did, and her showing up to all the support groups Jack went to. Outside of that, I see no reason as to why she would be fake. Jack goes on a business trip, and on the flight back home he meets Tyler Durden, an overly honest soap salesman who is dressed like a character on Good Times. He gets on Jack about not being upfront with himself and others and trying to make use of small talk, and then gets up and walks away. Tyler comes off as a person who has had his fill of red tape and has no time for anything other than frank and honest talk. Now, if you've seen the movie before, you know that Tyler is a figment of Jack's imagination, which makes me wonder how Jack came to all these conclusions deep inside himself, yet still acts the way he does. Personally, I feel like the things Tyler said are things that Jack can't bring himself to say out loud, but you can interpret it in your own way. Jack gets to his apartment, only to find that it's been blown to bits and he has nowhere to go. He calls up Tyler, who is instantly ready to hang out with a random stranger he barely knows. This is where things started to get a little weird, and I started to pick up on the fact that this was a little off. I did like how Tyler listens to Jack and tries to make him look on the bright side of things. Friends like that are always nice. Outside of that, Tyler and Jack begin to bond as they fight each other outside of a bar. The two head back to Tyler's house, which is old and broken down, showing us just how committed Tyler is to being a minimalist. He could live in a house in a nicer part of town, but he just needs a place to sleep, so this is fine. I get the message, but honestly this house is so filthy that you might get a rusty nail in your elbow just from turning a corner. I feel like this is a shining example of too much minimalism being not all that great. Because of his late night activities, Jack's performance at work suffers, causing his boss to get on him. I like that these escapades with Tyler are so fun for Jack that the other aspects of his life fade away, and Jack slowly looks worse and worse as the movie goes on. Jack and Tyler talk about their fathers, with Jack's dad leaving when he was 6, which at the time was becoming more and more of a problem over the previous 2 decades, and this type of story coming from Jack is great for endearing him to the audience. More and more people start to join Tyler and Jack's fights outside the bar, eventually moving down to the basement. Tyler lays out the rules and the fights begin. One thing that stood out to me was the fact that they weren't using any type of mat, yet the injuries seemed to only go as far as a black eye most of the time. If they were getting thrown to the concrete floor this often and no protective gear, things would be a lot messier. Mats probably weren't that expensive to get back then, and if they were, you could just add the rule of no takedowns, which would avoid the problem entirely. It's not an immersion breaking moment, but it is a little odd. Marla ends up calling Jack as she overdoses, but he leaves the phone hanging off the ringer, which causes Tyler to pick up and come to get her. This scene is pretty interesting when taking the twist of the movie into account. Jack really did want to save Marla, but for some reason chose not to, only to turn right around and go get her anyway. Tyler says that Marla is doing better than Jack because she is at the very least trying to hit rock bottom, and in a way he's right. Jack and Tyler's divide is how deeply this lifestyle should inform their decisions, which leads them to conflict down the road. Tyler thinks that this modern age should be avoided completely, while Jack agrees that there's flaws in society, but he still enjoys modern comforts. Tyler teaches Jack how to make soap, then burns his hand to teach him to accept his reality and let go of the things he thinks are important. I find it odd that this was his way of teaching something he could have just told him, especially given how much Jack trusts Tyler at this point. I feel as though this was the lesson that Tyler would want to hammer home, so he tried to make it as memorable as possible, and he definitely succeeded at that. Lou, who is the owner of the bar where Fight Club is held, comes in and tries to kick them out, only for Tyler to goad him into beating him up. Then he grabs onto him and spits blood into his face. This was when the AIDS epidemic was really horrible, and people were super afraid of others' blood, which I wasn't even thinking about the first time I saw it, meaning the impact wasn't exactly there for me. I was disgusted enough by the blood that the point of the scene still made sense to me, so it's fine. It's pretty interesting seeing the small ways movies will date themselves with scenes like this. I did like how Tyler chose to informally induct Lou, making him fight because it's his first time, and as Lou leaves he says, "See you next week," clearly thinking that the feeling Lou had as he beat Tyler will draw him back to Fight Club. Tyler sends out the members of Fight Club to start a fight and lose, leading to a fun scene showing priests, car salesmen, and businessmen getting pushed to their limit, culminating with Jack framing his boss for beating him up. This was a pretty good plan, and I'm surprised Jack didn't sue considering he had a pretty good case, having eyewitnesses see his boss stand over him with blood on his hands. Aside from that, Tyler ended up growing Fight Club into something new, Project Mayhem, which was created to bring people back to a time before death. Jack disagrees with this and argues with Tyler about it, leading to Tyler admitting that he blew up Jack's condo. It's crazy to me that Jack felt so trapped by his lifestyle that he resorted to blowing up his condo. The way people can relate when someone who would normally be a functioning member of society snaps is really interesting to me, and it shows just how important genuinely living and not just surviving truly is. But a lot of people just can't make time and they float along without fulfilling themselves. One morning, Jack wakes up and Tyler isn't there. Jack goes all around the country being just a step behind Tyler, coming across multiple fight clubs, right up until the point where Tyler appears in Jack's hotel room and reveals that he's never been real, which rocks Jack deeply. It turns out that Jack's real name is Tyler Durden, and this whole time a split personality of his has been acting on its own. This is a great twist and it adds to the rewatch value so much. This movie is littered with clues about Tyler, like how the doctor doesn't acknowledge him when he and Jack are at the hospital, or how a man gets on the bus and pushes past them but only says "excuse me" to Jack, all subtle enough that you won't pick up on them until your second watch. This scene is filled with great quotes and is the main reason for the cult classic status this movie has gained. Jack heads back home, finding out that there are thousands of members of Project Mayhem, and because he thinks Marla is in danger, he tries to send her away, only for her to get surrounded on the bus. I like the roller coaster ride we get put on through this scene, as Marla is understandably mad at Jack and not willing to listen to him. Then she finally takes the money Jack gives her, and just as you're thinking, it sucks that they're splitting up on such bad terms, but at least she'll be safe, she gets surrounded, and you see that even that isn't guaranteed. Things get even worse when Jack goes to the police to stop Project Mayhem, only for them to also be members, and they're fanatical enough to castrate him for the cause. They struck a great balance between being unsettling and being funny with this scene, especially with the delivery of lines like "we gotta get his balls." Jack eventually escapes the police and heads up to the building where Tyler is waiting. The two get into a fight which ends with Jack waking up in a chair. Jack finally realizes the power he has over Tyler and decides to shoot himself to get rid of Tyler. In a way, Tyler was somewhat vindicated because Jack did end up having to let go. Jack had to be willing to lose his life to save it, so in a way, Tyler's teachings were his own downfall. Marley gets brought up to Jack, and the two hold hands as the buildings around them explode, and the movie ends. Fight Club is one of those films that rewards you every time you watch it with something new. Edward Norton, Brad Pitt, and Helena Bonham Carter all have great chemistry, and I really can't think of a better trio to fit these roles. This was one of those pretty movies I talked about in the video I made about Drive, and while the way they filmed things back then made the colors pop a different way, it still holds up great and will continue to do so for a while. Who is the director of the film, calls Fight Club a coming-of-age movie, which really fits. I like the idea of an established career man finding fulfillment in something almost primal, maturing him in a way that wouldn't have been possible without it. If Jack were around now, he'd probably buy a Corvette to deal with his discontent in life. Jack's thoughts manifesting in the way they do make me think that Tyler doesn't just represent who Jack wants to be, he represents who Jack fears he might become, which is why Tyler goes so far in everything he does. Jack comes out of the movie seemingly taking the best aspects of his two personalities and deciding to go with the flow a bit more. You can't stop what's coming, but you can stay strong throughout it.